skating. But life wasn't all about skating. She was going to have a balance in her life.
When Scott would come home and say, how can we be champions one day, we would just kind of say, you have to make your mark, and it has to be a Scott and Tessa mark.
Our parents never pushed us or forced us to skate. They were just simply there and guided us through our careers. And they made sure that after every season they'd come to us and ask us if we wanted to skate. They did that every single year, year after year, after year, after year, after year, after year.
They even drove us to Waterloo at 4:15 a.m. 3 to 4 mornings of every week so that we could practice with coaches there for 3 hours before returning to school in London. At the ages of just 13 and 15, we made the decision to move away from our families full-time to train in Waterloo. And as you can imagine, that was an incredible sacrifice, but not one we ever thought twice about. I skipped grade 8 in order to better manage our skating schedule, and we would be on the ice from 6 to 9 every morning, go to school, go back to the rink to work out or do ballet, finish up our homework at home, and often be in bed before 8 p.m. That's not exactly the normal schedule for grade 9 and 10 students. Proms, semi-formals, movies, sleepovers, not for us.
We also learned in Waterloo the importance of common goals in our training. Our choreographer at that time, her name was Suzanne Killing, had a huge impact on our career. She encouraged us to look around and watch the other teams that we trained with. What exactly were they accomplishing when they spent the entire session fighting? She would sit us down once a week and we would talk about daily, weekly, seasonal, even career goals. And more importantly than that, we talked about how each other were feeling, how we made each other feel. And that was so important, especially as temperamental teenagers. It was there we learned to make effective and productive use of every minute on the ice and work through our differences and cultivate a code of respect. Tess and I are very different people, but we work hard at communicating and understanding each other's processes. We've never blamed one another. We've never name-called. We never even told each other to shut up, which is more than we can say, probably.
In fact, we go out of our way to attribute positive internal qualities to each other and discredit the negative things to external situational factors. We've always had each other's backs, and we're one another's biggest fans.
Then, when we were 15 and 17, it was time for us to take another leap. We moved to Canton, Michigan to train with Russian coaches and some of the best ice dance teams in the world. Again, this was another tough transition. There was no warmth to our coaching team, which was different to our other coaches who were like family members. We needed to adapt a more independent model of training. It was our responsibility to look after the off-ice training, which usually was taken care of for us. And we needed to build a strong support staff, and that took some time. Also, it was important that Tess and I were each other's family. I mean, we were in a completely different country. I mean, it was not that far away from our homes, but we felt really isolated, and we relied on each other for almost everything.
Including transportation, because I still wasn't old enough to drive. Everything was different in Michigan. In Waterloo, we lived with families. In Michigan, we both lived with young, competitive skaters. In Waterloo, we could attend regular high school, but in Michigan, online education was really our only option. And as Scott mentioned, in Waterloo, our coaches were like family members. They were warm, encouraging, approachable. In Michigan, well, let's just say things were very different. The skating world suddenly started to feel more and more isolated. And of course, the more success we experienced, the harsher that reality became.
But regardless, we worked harder than we ever worked before, and we pushed our bodies to the limits. We won titles, and we created programs that we loved, and we never stopped wanting more. We were hungry, we were determined, and we were unstoppable.
Until we were stoppable.
Maybe a bit stoppable, yeah. You're a little bit naive, too. But in 2008, it was only our second World Championships. We came second. So here we are, a year out of the Olympics, and we're 2 years out of the Olympics. Oh man, teamwork. But we knew that the Olympics were on the horizon, and we were setting ourselves up perfectly. We felt like we had to win the 2009 Worlds in order to have a shot at the Olympics. But in 2008, we started putting in 13, 14-hour training days. We worked with acrobats from Cirque du Soleil to come up with new lifts. We even worked with some modern dance teachers to give ourselves a new style on the ice. We wanted to stand out, and we needed to make a statement. We thought that working longer meant working better.
What we didn't realize was that we were taking it too far. I developed an overuse injury in my shin that ultimately required surgery. And this was not part of our pre-Olympic plan. It was such a frustrating process because no one seemed to really know much about the condition, which was chronic exertional compartment syndrome. Basically, I could skate for 30 seconds at a time, or until my muscles were strangulated and intense numbness and pain took over. I so clearly remember sitting in our team doctor's office when she said, "You have two options. You can either try the surgery, which may or may not work, or retire." It was devastating, and I felt like I was letting the team down, but it was an easy decision. Surgery took place in October of 2008, followed by a 2 to 3 month rehab at the Fowler Kennedy Clinic. The most interesting part of this time period was that Scott and I stopped communicating. He was training in Michigan, and I was recovering in London. It was as if we just didn't know how to remain open and honest with one another, which was very unsettling and foreign territory for us. Retrospectively, I think we were both trying to protect the other. He didn't want to rub in the fact that he was healthy, ready to train, and waiting for me, not so patiently, to return to the ice, and I just couldn't quite explain my pain, nor could I bring myself to deliver disappointing news, day after day. Frankly, that was the hardest thing we've ever endured as partners.
When Tess did return to the ice, she was frightened of the pain and had very little confidence in her skating ability, and which is really abnormal for one of the best skaters in the world. But after minimal training, we took the ice at Nationals in January, just 2 months after that surgery, right? Yeah. And we hadn't even completed a run-through of our compulsory dance, and we probably did our other programs maybe twice, and needless to say, taking the ice, just hoping to get through our programs, not really the best strategy. In fact, I'm sure you guys all know, the feeling of being unprepared is just the absolute worst. But we made it through Nationals, and we persevered on to Worlds, where we ended up coming third. It was both disappointing and rewarding at the same time. Not what we'd anticipated in our grand scheme of becoming the best in the world, but we were just satisfied to make it through that season. Tess, still in a lot of pain, was constantly trying to push through the pain. And here, this is when we adopted the mantra, adapt and conquer.
We couldn't train. We couldn't train like we'd grown accustomed to. So we needed to come up with a new plan. We needed to protect my legs and limit energy expenditure, which, let me tell you, athletes are not hardwired to do that. But we trained smarter. We learned that we could form our own method of preparing, one that differed from our competitors, but still gave us an edge. It felt like no one was suffering like we were at that time, but no one was as appreciative of the ability to train as we were.
Okay. Let's fast forward to the Olympics in Vancouver. That's my favorite story. It's hard to fit in 17 years into 30 minutes here. At 20 and 22, here we are, the world's biggest stage in our own country. It was an athlete's dream come true. To say there was pressure is an understatement. Not to mention what wasn't in the media is that Tess was still getting about 7 hours a day of physiotherapy just to get through training. After a rough and painful week of training off-site following the opening ceremonies, we began practicing at the official arena just a couple of days before we were set to compete.
The energy in the building just felt right. Judges watched our every move, and fans cheered us on so loudly we could barely hear our music. As the magnitude of the situation grew larger than life, our world became all that we saw. It was just us. 2 kids who trained their whole lives for this moment. 2 friends who took the ice and reminded one another to take it one step at a time. 2 people who shared a moment seemingly unaware of the 30 million people sharing it with them. It It was special, and it was ours.
Now, we should take a minute. You almost choked me up. It's easy for us to look back and romanticize about Vancouver. It's simple to look back and think we skated perfectly, that everything fell into place and that the stars aligned. But I reminded Tessa as we flew to Sochi last February that 2010 at the Olympics, they weren't the best skates of our life. I mean, in the free dance, we almost hit the boards. We bobbled around the first 30 seconds, and I think I called the spin out the wrong way and ended with not facing the judges, which isn't really ideal. But it served as a great lesson for us. Tess and I then knew that we need to be the best even when we weren't at our best.
The post-games whirlwind was a bit of a blur, but one that ended quickly because just 3 weeks after the closing ceremonies, we won our first World Championships in Torino, Italy. I think we were more relieved than excited, but we were exhausted and really just ready to hibernate. It was then we made the easy decision to continue competing. We felt we had more to give, more potential to explore.
Although, not quite sure we knew what we were getting ourselves into with that one, but they say winning the first time is easy, and although in some ways carrying the Olympic title was empowering, it meant that we had big targets on our backs. We had more to prove, more expectations to meet, and a higher standard to achieve. But we embraced this, as we always did. No one was as hard on us as we were on ourselves, but the stakes were high. And Tessa ended up having a second surgery, the same surgery in the fall of 2010, on both her shins and calves to relieve some of the pressure in her muscle compartments.
You'll be happy to hear that we did a much better job the second time around of communicating and staying in touch. From that point on, we tried to continually reinvent ourselves and push the boundaries of the sport of ice dance. Most importantly, when there was a time full of doubt, and I even considered a third surgery, the same surgery on my legs, I worked with a team of sports scientists and physiotherapists to change my mechanics, how I moved, what muscles I recruited, the brain patterns that cued my body. It was almost like learning to write with the other hand, but it did allow me to skate without pain. We learned so much about our bodies, so much about ourselves, and what it meant to be athletes. It was a new dimension to our training that was more intellectual, more science-based. Interestingly, we felt we became the masters of our sport only after we had won the Olympics.
We'd be remiss if we neglected to mention the fact that for 9 years we trained with our biggest rivals, Merrill Davis and Charlie White. We shared the same coaching team of about 5 to 10 people. And it was an interesting dynamic, one that the media really latched onto because it was so unique to figure skating. Mostly, we found it was a positive, motivating environment. I mean, we had the rare opportunity to watch our closest competitors, how they trained, what moves they were doing, their attitudes, etc. But let's be clear, it was very tense, and there's no doubt about it that we all wanted to win desperately. Tess and I worked hard to find a balance. We wanted to use them for additional motivation where we needed it, but we couldn't lose sight of our own training or become too absorbed in the politics of the rink, and there was definitely politics at the rink.
Politics and skating?
No.
Every day was a competition. Every day was a battle. But we found that talking about the impact that our training environment had on each of us was paramount. As you can imagine, we perceived the situation very differently. Once we'd expressed ourselves, we were able to refocus and get back to the task at hand, leaving Meryl and Charlie to watch us and wonder and doubt. It also secured the notion that no one was as invested in our career as we were. No one was just going to hand us a medal for showing up. We needed to take responsibility, and we needed to make it happen.
We approached the Sochi Olympics with the same, but entirely different mindset as Vancouver. It was similar because we were there to win. We wanted that gold bag. We were prepared, and we were in great shape. We knew we needed to be in unison together if we were going to have a chance to win. But it was different because we were 4 years older, and let's hope that we were 4 years wiser. Tessa now completely healthy, clean bill of health, not doing those 7 hours of physiotherapy, actually got to take in her Olympic Games. But we were also keenly aware of the fact that it could be her last Olympics. And also we were aware of what it meant to wear the Canadian flag on our back. and what those rings truly meant to us. Because of that, one of our goals was just to be present every single moment, whether it was at practice, in a workout, or just talking to some other Canadian athletes in the cafeteria. We were going to be present, and we were definitely going to be present if we got the chance to stand on the podium again.
Sochi was a dream. We had the opportunity to compete for 2 medals and received 2 silvers, one with Canada's figure skating team and one individually.
Well, individually, like us.
As a unit.
You didn't
right.
leave me at the board.
Right.
It's like we were
Together.
there. Yeah, we're an individual.
But it's funny, when we got home from Sochi, everyone would comment on how we handled the situation, saying things like, "You were so classy, and you put on such a brave face for the cameras." But truly, our reactions were genuine. Sure, we weren't satisfied with the silver, but we were satisfied with our performances. Going in, it may have felt like the odds were stacked against us, but all we could do was make it hard for the judges to put us second. And we did. We skated our absolute best. And in those moments when we hugged after the music ended, it was enough to fill our hearts. It was enough because of what it took to get. The silver was enough because it represented 17 years of special moments that we shared together. We are enough because we know what we invested, and we're not defined by the color of a medal. We're not defined by judges. We're not even defined by what it is we do on the ice. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. And they obviously have a very storied, amazing athletic story. Now we're going to get to the business part of it, though. You know, when you hear that athletic story of theirs and that venture, it's interesting or hard to even imagine that they also had a business responsibility, a business portfolio. And when they're putting in, especially in the lead up to the games, 8-9 hour days in a town where they don't actually live and coming back on weekends to London, you have to fit the business around that. Off the top, I kind of mentioned how it's really important to understand their foundation of who they are and just let that naturally be their story. And, you know, to use a marketing analogy, it's kind of like their identity is their product. There's no substitute for a great product. You think about brands like Tesla Motors or Airbnb that are innovating the space. And those are brands that their story is really just embedded in the DNA of who they are in their product. And then the hard job with marketing is just finding a way to tell that story. You guys, when I listen to your story, obviously your identity is partnership, commitment, working together to overcome adversity. And when we've looked to bring you opportunities to tell that story, whether it's media, partnership, or otherwise, you know, we always have a very keen eye to respecting that and to helping to contribute to that foundation. But maybe give us the athlete perspective of, you know, what's it like when you go from amateur athletes at a very young age, not having any of this business stuff to worry about, and then all of a sudden all these opportunities come up and you have to stay true to your foundation, not get distracted, but also have a responsibility to deliver on that side as well?
Well, I think we always had our skating goals, and that was the center of everything. Everything revolved around what it was we wanted to accomplish on the ice. But after we won the Olympics in Vancouver, it was like the flick of a switch. Here we were as athletes who had trained at that point 14 years, and all of a sudden we needed to be business people. We needed to put on our business hats and understand contracts and negotiations and how to present ourselves. And I think the biggest shift at that point was realizing that we were public figures in a way, and we had a responsibility to be role models. So there was sort of a sense of moral responsibility because we wanted to push the sport in Canada. We want to encourage young people to get active. We want to, do all of those things to inspire others. And yet, there's nothing more selfish than being an amateur athlete. I mean, it's all about us. So it was sort of finding that balance of how do we tell our story? How do we let people in and remain true to who we are as skaters?
Yeah, when we were always skating, I always felt like it was a balancing act, and especially as a younger athlete, felt like all of these commitments were in the way of the training. And, you know, as we got older, we were fortunate enough to have these partners, and I think aligning ourselves with the right partners, actually like that PNG video, help us tell our story and are kind of aligned with what we believe in, you know, made it a lot easier. And, you know, as amateur athletes, we need that support. You know, the government of Canada does a great job, obviously, supporting us as well, but, you know, we need that little extra boost. And, you know, we're adults now, so it's not like we're just teenagers trying to, you know, play amateur sport. You know, we have to try our best to be able to fund what we do, which is skating is one of the most expensive sports out there. And so it became necessary, but at the same time, once I realized that, I found that working with these partners became really useful, and it was kind of a good tool. And I don't want to say a good distraction, but it was just a different type of energy.
Yeah. Talk a bit about the evolution of, you know, the spotlight on you guys. You know, I think it's fair to say you came into Vancouver as athletes, and 2010 was probably the starting point of you becoming personalities. You started working with a marketing agency shortly after 2010, and you know, from that perspective, there's a big evolution between 2010 and 2014. You talked about being more athletically and mentally in a different place heading to Sochi, but I think it's probably fair to say your business portfolio was also in a very different place. You were well-known Canadian athletes and personalities heading into 2014. You had a mature portfolio of corporate partners supporting you. You know, and especially in those months leading up, our job as your agency is really to focus on, you know, how do we give them the right opportunities to tell their story, whether it be through partnerships or through media, you know, to create those emotional connections with fans that are bigger than the results, and to find the right corporate partners that fit, but at the same time really balancing, you know, your training and the demanding schedule, because ultimately you're trying to win, you know, for the second time. Do you guys feel an evolution of, you know, when the spotlight became on you, and how did you guys work together to kind of essentially adapt and conquer?
Well, heading into the 2010 Olympics, I remember taking note of the other athletes, even other figures. Patrick Chan is a great example. I remember thinking, he's sponsored by McDonald's, he has Cheerios. Everyone seemed to have partners, and we didn't have anything. And looking back, I think that was a blessing. We weren't mature enough to handle that extra pressure.
Yeah, we would have been in trouble, for sure.
And I think that was, you know, a huge benefit to us in 2010. But there was a huge shift, and we needed to bring on partners who understood our focus, who understood our goals, and who could work with us to facilitate, you know, how we, you know, help their brand and how they help us, and that was critical. But there certainly is extra pressure. I think the biggest part is often when we had partners, you know, the return is we have obligations and we have demands, and just finding time in our schedule, managing that, you know, it's never a good time to miss training. So, you know, balancing that was critical.
I think we also almost found it intriguing. I mean, we kind of came in under the radar. I remember CTV in 2010, the games were in February. CTV sent a crew to us in January saying, we didn't know that you guys had a chance here at being, so we should do a special on you so we can run something. And that really did work for us, as Tessa kind of touched on. But then the reason why we came back, or a big reason why we came back, is we wanted to win again, and we wanted the pressures. And we heard great athletes like Roger Federer and talk about the pressures of winning after winning. And that was really intriguing to us. So we kind of welcomed all of the support that we got. As I said, we're so fortunate to have a corporate support and have this very different attention that we were getting before 2014. And we almost found that intriguing. It was more of a challenge. And going into Sochi, luckily we were more mature. We could handle it. And
well, it was almost surrounding ourselves with excellence and partners who were part of our support team, and we weren't partnered with anyone who we didn't feel that familial connection with. They were a part of our team through and through. We could go to them and talk to them about anything. We could go for dinner with them, and that was really important to us, to feel like we knew our sponsors and our partners on a personal level, and they really became part of Birching Moyer team.
And our blackout period before games is, you know, Tessa and I are like to get in our zone. So our sponsors really understood that, and we were thankful for that. But we felt like we openly communicated that with them, and since they respected that, then we felt like we could give more back after the games.
And from the agency perspective, securing partners is probably one of our biggest roles that we play. And so our job when we're looking at who are the right partners for Tessa and Scott is to really identify those brands that resonate with their story about commitment, perseverance, partnership, but that also can leverage that story to help drive their business. And so we're never looking for transactional relationships. We're looking for opportunities for them to connect to the fans, to help better their business, but at the end, something that just allows Tessa and Scott to be Tessa and Scott. It's not contrived, it's not manufactured, it's just really based on who they truly are.
I thought you were always trying to stifle the Scottness. Keep me under wraps, so I don't get out there in the social media.
We gotta work on your social media.
Okay.
Let's talk a bit about media, because there's the partner side, there's the media side, all kind of interwoven into building your story and letting the narratives kind of release out there and tell people who you really are. Tessa and Scott was also the name of a documentary series that ran on the W Network on Chorus in the lead up to the Sochi Games. It was a pretty thoughtful choice on our part to do it in that time. Olympic awareness is at its highest peak. And it gave an avenue to tell your story in a very different way, to show both the on-ice but also the off-ice you, to really differentiate you guys as athletes the way that everybody else was being covered. And also to start to build a legacy and a portfolio for what comes next, potentially after your athletic careers. Things like the marketing media that they put into that, you couldn't buy that type of support if we tried. So, obviously it was a very careful decision we made to do that, but they also kind of became a support network for you guys. Can you maybe talk to what it's like to be in the months leading up to, your final games and have this documentary series happening at the same time in that decision?
Well, I think a lot of it leading up into the games that I didn't kind of mention is that we're so focused on our goal. I put my trust blindly in our team, and thankfully, because I think David's right in there, because I didn't want to do the documentary series at first. When it first came to me, I was so scared of it, and even when we agreed to do it, I would lay awake at night and just be petrified that it was going to ruin my Olympic career. And now looking back, I'm so thankful that we did it, because it gave us this avenue that you talked about to kind of allow Canadians into our story. And the crew was just so fantastic, which I didn't expect. I think the first time we met them, we were kind of standoffish, and then in an hour we were best friends. So I think it was probably one of the first projects where I felt like I could really be me. And maybe sometimes too much of me, like I talked about, but I think people got to know more of our personalities, and that really is a special part of our story, how we work together. I think people will see us on the ice and maybe think it's kind of a romance that behind closed doors is not true, and not romance, but that it's too good to be true, I guess. And that's not really the case. Like, we really are great friends. We really enjoy skating together. We really enjoy working together, and as different as we are, we have this great synergy when we work together, and I think that really came through in the doc series, and it gave us coverage that we could have never dreamed of.
Well, part of the appealing thing, too, was at that point, we weren't on any form of social media, and we're such private people that it seemed like an interesting avenue to, as Scott mentioned, let people in and really show who we are in a way that wasn't packaged. It was just us in our training. It was emotional highs and lows, and an interesting part of the decision process was that if we had signed with another partner, for example, and they needed 20 service days in the year of the Olympics, well, we just couldn't give that time away. But with the documentary, they didn't take away anything. They were just following us. We went about our daily lives, and it didn't prohibit us from training the way we wanted to. And as Scott mentioned, they were like family. I mean, I didn't realize how lonely the rink had really become. And going there with 10, 15 people all the time that would wink at me and smile, and I knew they wanted the best for us. I mean, that was really refreshing, and we relied on that, I think, more than we knew. In fact, our coach always says we skated better with the cameras there, so it did help our training.
Yeah, it was neat how it kind of evolved in our training year, because I can remember even having to debrief, because they always wanted to talk about things on TV, and we we'd just be like, yeah, well, we don't have anything to say. Like, okay, we'll go for another dinner, and then all of a sudden we sit down and it's like we spew out all this stuff that we've been holding back for the week. So we kind of spun it and made it really work for us, and I think it was an advantage almost going in. And then when we got to even Sochi, and we were pretty used to the cameras at that point in our career, but it wasn't abnormal. Like, it just felt normal that there was always a boom hanging over our head, and anything I just said could be captured. It's just so scary.
I think we became those people. People would come up to us on the street and say, "You're those two from TV.
Yeah.
You were on that show."
Yeah.
So we weren't really the Olympians or the skaters anymore.
And when it really hit me how big it was, because again, we lived in a bubble a little bit, and we
On the
just
States, too.
recently watched, like you just watched the
watch
series
it,
for the
yeah.
first time. I still haven't seen it. I've seen one episode. But at Stars on Ice, when we're doing our shows on Stars on Ice, and people would be coming through the line and like, oh, how many years have you been coming to Stars on Ice for? Oh, this is my very first one, but you're like, I watched your show. And it's like, oh, that's so
Yeah,
awesome.
it brought a new audience.
Completely different people, so that was really neat.
It was pretty cool. That show went on to get picked up in 11 countries now. So
Yeah, our Italian has really improved.
I wouldn't sound better. There you go. Oh, if he's Italian.
So we have the corporate partners opportunities, bring opportunities like the doc series. We're really trying to balance that where we're running the business side, bring you guys the right opportunities, let me tell your story, and it all leads up to 2014. But now we're in 2015, and for us as your agency, we looked at the Tessa and Scott brand and how powerful a connection it is, and we're always going to leverage that amazing foundation. But now it's also start saying, what else is there to explore? How do we look at taking that, understanding who they are in a different light, and starting to understand the best business decisions to extend the Tessa and Scott brand. And some of those might be together, and some of those might be small extensions individually. Some might be Scott alone, some would be Tessa alone. As we start to look at who they are, we look at their each individual personalities and where their natural extensions are.
She's scary, she said. She doesn't like to be alone.
And just keep bringing you the opportunities. But even from both an athletic and a business standpoint, it's a very interesting time for your story, who you are, your next chapter. Maybe share with us a bit of where your mindset is, both athletically and on the business side.
Well, athletically, it's kind of a tricky time because we just last weekend we got the opportunity to go to Kingston and watch nationals. That was the first nationals we haven't gone to. Our very first nationals we talked about was in 2001. So it's been a couple of years, and it's weird to sit on the outside, and I don't think we truly know, and I know it's so annoying, and our friends in the press really don't like that answer, but we don't know where we're going yet athletically. We don't know if we have skated our last skate on amateur ice, or if we'd like to come back for... I love the look of those rings. I'd love to skate one more time there, but there's a whole lot that has to go into that, and I think that it's very possible that it might just be a feeling I have for the rest of my life. But business-wise, oh, man.
The world is your oyster.
Gee, no, I don't feel like that.
I feel it's the worst.
You have to say that.
Yeah, it's an interesting time for us because we've made decisions as a team for 17 years. So even the thought of doing things on our own is quite different, but it's also exhilarating and it's refreshing and it's frightening. We worked, in the end of our career, we basically worked in 4-year cycles. So I could tell you 4 years from now what I would be doing on August 2nd at 2:02 p.m., which is strange. And I don't know what I'll be doing, this summer or this fall.
Next week.
Yeah. But it is really exciting. I'm close to finishing a psychology degree, and I'll continue with my education. And I think, we were talking to our friends backstage and saying that it was the year for us to say yes to everything, every opportunity. If it meant stepping out of our comfort zone, even better, because it was one more avenue for us to explore and see what we like. We're trying our hand in a little bit of broadcasting.
Yeah, that was so much fun.
And that's been neat. So I think it's a great time for us to try new things, and at 25 and 27 sort of redefine who we are and who we want to be.
And what's really neat too is when we get an opportunity like this or like broadcasting, it's interesting how much it is more comfortable together, and there's a natural fit. So there's part of that that'll always be Tessa and Scott, that'll always be Virtue more, especially in the figure skating space and hopefully the broadcasting space. We just feel like that's just a natural fit for us. So